a long time ago, when I was in my mid-30s and my late 30s, I played indoor soccer in a men's league. And so because field time was at a minimum, our games were usually 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. And so I'd go through my whole day, get done with the day, usually get the kids to bed, and then it was time to go play soccer. And as someone who is starting to feel a little bit of the, you know what happens as you get older, I would find myself having to figure out a way to get my energy level up while I was on the way to the field. And so I'd be driving, and it was about a 15 to 20-minute drive to get to the indoor soccer complex, and I created a playlist for myself. That was my playlist to get me pumped up and fired up. And so I found some songs these are the songs that will work for me. They'll get me fired up. They'll get me excited. So I had a song, You'll Never Walk Alone, which doesn't sound like a real fired up song, but it's the song they sing at Liverpool before every game. And I found a recording of the actual crowd singing it. And so that'd get me fired up and ready to go. There was a song called Miss Sarajevo, which was a compilation of U2 and Pavarotti. And maybe you didn't think those two could go together, but they do, and it's beautiful, and it's amazing, and it just stirs your soul. Of course, there were a couple of Backstreet Boys songs, because those really get you going. But every night, as I'd head to the field, I would put this on, and by the time I got to the field, I was fired up, I was energized, and ready to play, because this was my pre-game playlist. For the next several weeks, we're going to look at a pre-game playlist in the Bible. We're looking at a series of psalms, which are often called the Psalms of Ascent. And these are songs that were sung by the Jewish people as they would climb up the mountain to Jerusalem. So a few times a year, many people who were Jewish people would make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem for some of the religious feasts, the Feast of Booths, the Passover, the Feast of Pentecost, all of these things. And as they would make this journey, they would actually together sing these songs. And these songs were kind of like to get them fired up, to get them energized, to get them ready for the celebration they were going to. Today we're going to look at one of those, Psalm 127. So if you have your Bible, you can open it there. You can pull it up on your phone or your tablet. We'll put it up on the screen as we go. But let's look at this song for the journey, this song for the climb. Verse 1, it says, "Unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchman stays awake in vain." Two really powerful truths here. If you build something and God is in it, it will be successful. If you watch over something and God is in it, it will be successful. And this was something that the journeyers to Jerusalem could see with their eyes. This song was probably written by Solomon. And so if you can imagine people journeying to Jerusalem during the days of Solomon, this was the golden age of the Jewish people. As they would get closer to the city, they would look up to the city, and they would see the gleaming temple standing over everything else. And as they sang this song, they would be reminded, when God builds a house, there is success in it. And there is the house. God was in the building of the temple. And that's the place where we go to meet with him. But then also they would sing about the watchman on the wall. They would look at the walls, and it was a powerful reminder to them of how God had protected them, how God had provided for them. And so as they sang these words, they knew it to be true because they could see it with their eyes, that when God is in the building of something, it is successful. When God is in the protecting of something, it is successful. But there's a secondary lesson here. There's a little bit of a caution. There's a little bit of a warning. Because what this says is, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. We're going to see that word a couple of times in this psalm. And what that word really means is meaningless. It's the same word that Solomon uses in Ecclesiastes over and over and over again. It says meaningless, meaningless, all is meaningless. It could be translated as emptiness. And what Solomon's warning us against here is that we can fill our lives with a lot of things, and our life will still be empty if God's not in it. Because sometimes we like to build a life for ourselves. And when we build a life for ourselves apart from God, we'll discover that life is meaningless. And sometimes there are things in our lives that we like to hold on to, that we like to protect, that we like to keep safe, that we like to watch over. And again, if God's not in that, it will be empty. It will be meaningless. The next verse follows the same theme, verse 2. Solomon says, "It is in vain," there's our word again, "it is in vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives to his beloved sleep." Solomon is simply saying this: why work yourself to death if you can't enjoy your food and you can't sleep at night? Because there's this temptation that we all have as people, is to work harder, to hustle, to put the hours in, to get up early, to go to bed late, thinking that's what's going to get us ahead, right? If I work a little bit harder, that will get me ahead. But what we don't even realize is that kind of a schedule, that kind of a work, not having a balance to life, leads us to a place of stress and anxiety. He calls it eating the bread of anxious toil. I'm so stressed that I can't even enjoy my food. And then he uses this line that he gives his beloved sleep, which is to say that it's foolish to work yourself to the point where you can't sleep, when you could instead rely on God. Now, what Solomon's really getting at with these first two verses is he's teaching us a truth that when God is in something, it goes well, it will be blessed. But when we try to build without God, often we're falling for three empty promises that the world gives us. Let me show you what those three empty promises are according to these verses. The three empty promises of the world are that you can be comfortable, that you can be safe, and that you can be prosperous. We all want to be comfortable, right? We want to build a comfortable life for ourselves. And if we're really honest, most of us would say, what I really need to be comfortable in life is just a little bit more. And this would be true for people who have a lot and for people who have a little. We all say the same thing. I would be more comfortable in life if I just had a little bit more. And the reality is, we'll always say that. There will always be just a little bit more that we need to be comfortable. But the irony is, what we actually need is to be uncomfortable. Because it's when we're uncomfortable, that's when we grow. Right? Growth is the result of change, and change is difficult. It's uncomfortable. And oftentimes, God brings things into our lives, and he allows things into our lives that make us extremely uncomfortable because he has something he wants us to learn. He has something he wants to change in us, something he wants to remove from our lives or add to our lives. But it's in those seasons of discomfort that God is doing his greatest work on us. And so when we buy into this lie that the world gives us, you can be comfortable. If you just build a little bit more, if you just work a little bit harder, you can be comfortable. We're missing the whole point. Comfort is not the goal. And the same is true of safety. We have this idea that if we just hold on tight enough, or if we just accumulate enough, if we just protect what we have, then we can have this concept of safety, and we all want to be safe. But you realize there's no guarantee of safety in life. Back in 2004, one of the Chicago Cubs' best players, Sammy Sosa, wound up on the 21-day disabled list. We call it something different now, the injury list or something like that. But he wound up having to miss several weeks of baseball because of an injury, not one that happened on the field, but one that happened when he sneezed. He hurt his back sneezing, which just goes to show you can be in the best shape in the world and you can take really good care of yourself. You never know what might come around the corner. It might be a sneeze that puts you on your back. There is no guarantee in this life of safety. And when we obsess about it, and when we protect, and when we hold tight, and when we cling to what we have, thinking this is what we need to keep us safe, we're forgetting about something Jesus told us. Do you remember what Jesus said? He said, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth. That word store up means to hold on to protect, to keep. Jesus says, don't hold so tightly to the things of this world thinking that's what's going to keep you safe, that's what's going to make you comfortable, because all of that will go away. And that brings us to the third empty promise of the world, is that you can be prosperous if you just work hard enough, right? If you just work hard enough, you can be prosperous. That was the second verse, right? The getting up early, the going to bed late, even if it means you can't eat and you can't sleep because you're so stressed because you're working so hard, but it's because the goal is prosperity. This isn't something new in our world. This is something that's been going on for thousands of years. In fact, in the time of Jesus, this was a mindset that people have. And so to those people, Jesus told a story. In Luke chapter 12, he said this. Jesus is talking about a man who is building prosperity for himself. And the man says to himself, I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store up all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. Do you see all three of the world's lies here? He's prosperous, he thinks. He's safe, he thinks. He's building bigger barns to store his stuff, to protect his stuff, to keep his stuff. And he thinks he's going to be comfortable. Relax, eat, drink, be merry. But God says to this man, you fool, tonight your soul will be demanded of you. You see, as you work in your life, and it's good to work, as you build in your life, as you protect things in your life, everything you're building, protecting, and working on is either something that has eternal value or that has temporal value. Earthly value. You see, not every investment you make in life is equal. Some of the things that you invest in this life will not last, and some will. This is why Jesus got to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, one of his greatest sermons. And he said at the end of the Sermon on the Mount that, this is Matthew 7, everyone then who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. Notice that Jesus does not guarantee that the storms won't come. He says, look, if you listen to me, if you build your life on my teaching, it will stand firm. He doesn't say the storms won't come, because the storms will come. Get this, no matter what you build your life on, the storms of life are going to come. The question is, will what you have built withstand the storm? Jesus says, the life that is built on me, the life that is built on my teachings, that's the life that withstands the storm. So we get to the end of verse 2 in Psalm 127, and the psalm really takes almost an odd shift. In fact, this week, and I was talking to some other pastors about how they were going to teach us. We talked for quite a while as to how to put the first half of this psalm together with the second half of the psalm, because they feel like they don't actually match up together. And what I would suggest is this. In verses 1 and 2, what Solomon does is he shows us what happens when we try to build our life ourselves. When we focus all of our energy on what we want, what we have. And then the second half shows us what God has given to us to bring meaning to our lives. Because here's the reality. We can't bring meaning to our lives. God has to do this. Everything we build without him is meaningless. It's empty. It's vain. But then we get to verse 3, and the song shifts. It says, behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. It's a gift from God. This is something that God gives to us to make our lives meaningful. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. You know, I think that God gives us children for many reasons. He says that they're a blessing, that they're a reward, that they're a heritage. I think that one of the reasons God gives us children is to teach us. We learn a lot when we're parents. Well, one of the things that I never really understood until I was a dad was what it means that God loves us unconditionally. And I remember changing some of those first diapers for our kids and thinking to myself, so this is unconditional love. Because this kid here does nothing for me, right? They're at that age. They don't do anything for us. They don't help around the house. They don't do the dishes. All they do is cry and eat and make a mess. And every time I clean it up, they do it again, and I have to clean it again. And yet I love them, and I would do anything for them, and I would give my life for them, and that's how God loves us. We do nothing for him. God's not sitting up in heaven thinking, boy, what I really need from these people is this. There is nothing that I can do to make God's life any better. In fact, the only thing that I do is make a mess. And then he cleans it up, and then I make another one. And through it all, he loves me. And he says, I would do anything for these people. And then he sent his son to give his life for us. So children taught me something about unconditional love. Children also, they can teach us a little bit about sacrifice, right? About selflessness. Most people are pretty selfish until they have kids. And then they discover what it means to give their life away. And when you truly discover what it means to give your life away, to say, you know what, my kids are now more important than me, now all of a sudden I'm learning something more about Jesus, aren't I? Because that's how Jesus views us. He does nothing for himself. He does everything for us. He was willing to humble himself, to be humiliated, to submit himself to death, even death on a cross, so that we could have eternal life with him. I think one of the reasons that God gives us children is so that we have an opportunity to pass the faith to the next generation. In fact, if you read the Bible from beginning to end, this is the pattern of the Bible, is that the way the faith gets passed from generation to generation to generation is because parents are passing it on to their children. This is one of the things that God said to the children of Israel. This is from Deuteronomy 6. I'm just going to read it. You can listen. God says this, and these words that I command you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. Now listen to how you teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. God says to his people, you take my words, you take my promises, and you do everything you can to keep them in front of your children. You see, one of the goals for a Jewish parent was to do everything they could to make sure their children knew everything they could about who God was, what he had done for them, and what he had promised to them. And so when you read through these Psalms of Ascents, you actually begin to see that that's part of what these are about. Because as these families would be journeying to Jerusalem together, they would be singing these songs, and it would be an opportunity for the parents to teach the children about God, about who he was, about what he had done for them. Think about their history. He parted the Red Sea to rescue them from slavery. He provided manna in the desert. He provided water from the rock. He brought down the walls of Jericho. He saved the people time and again from invaders. People like Daniel and Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, who boldly and courageously stayed true to him, he rescued. Think of the life of Joseph, where God worked through all of the suffering that Joseph endured in order to make sure that his people were provided for. This was the rich history they had, and this is what they would teach their children. As they were sitting, as they were walking, as they were eating, no matter what they were doing, they were talking about who God was, what he had done for them, and what he had promised to them. And then in verse 4 of this psalm, we see this picture, right? There's this picture that Solomon gives us of how this works. He says, children are like arrows. Now, I don't know how many of us actually shoot a bow and arrow that often. I don't. I know a little bit about it. And when I think about what it means that children are like arrows, there are three things that I think we can extrapolate from that. The first is that arrows must be prepared. If you're going to shoot an arrow and you're going to hit the target, that arrow must be prepared, right? Especially back then when you couldn't manufacture things as well as you can now. The shaft of the arrow needs to be straight, because if it's crooked, the arrow will not fly straight. The point or the tip or the arrowhead, it needs to be sharp so that it will penetrate the target, whatever the target may be. And it has to be affixed well so that it will stay on. The feathers, or the fletching, if you like, but the feathers, they have to be put on in a balanced way so that the arrow will fly right. If they're not balanced just right, the arrow will go crooked. And so you see, this idea is, if I want to shoot an arrow and have it hit the target, I have to prepare the arrow before I shoot it. And the same is true of children. Right? As parents, we want our kids to hit the target in life. But I can be confident that my kids will not hit the target if I don't prepare them ahead of time. If I don't prepare them before I launch them. So how do I prepare my children to hit the target? Just like what Deuteronomy said. I fill their lives with the knowledge of God, who He is, what He's done, what He has promised. We have conversations about it. I ensure that they know as much of God's Word as they possibly can. I prepare them ahead of time so that they can hit the target. The second thing that's true about arrows is that arrows must be aimed. I know this sounds like really simple, but it's true. You know, whether I'm hunting something or fighting in a medieval war or whether I'm just target shooting, if I don't aim my arrow, I will not hit the target. Right? If I just kind of shoot it willy-nilly, it's going to go wherever it goes. If I don't focus on the target and aim at the target, I'm never going to hit the target. But sometimes this is how people parent. Right, we just kind of go through life. I got to take care of my kids. I got to make sure they're fed. I'm going to put a screen in front of them so they don't bother me. We're going to do all the things. We're going to get them in a good school. We're going to do the sports. I'm going to keep up with the Joneses. I'm going to make sure we have an Instagram-worthy life. I'm going to do all this stuff, right? But I never stop for a minute and say, what's the real target? What's the real target that I want my kids to hit? Where do I really want to aim them? And here's the reality. We aim our children by teaching them and demonstrating for them what is valuable in life. You know, it's one thing to bring them to church on Sunday and stick them in Sunday school for an hour and have them learn some good lessons. But as they grow, they're watching me. And they want to know what I'm aiming at. Because what I'm aiming at in their minds, that's the target. And so while I may say the target is a life with Jesus, but if my life is all about chasing money or advancement or prosperity or comfort or convenience or toys or vacations or whatever else it may be, my kids are watching and I am aiming them. And they will fly to the target that I've shown them to fly for. But if in my life I demonstrate for them this humble obedience to God and a desire to follow Him and to be more and more like Christ in the way that I live, in the way that I love, in the way that I serve, they will see that and they will realize that is valuable. Where I aim them is where they will fly. And if I never think about aiming them, they will never hit the target. Third thing about arrows, they must be released. This is sometimes hard with kids, but sometimes you have to let go. We used to always say our job was from the moment our children were born to get them ready to leave. Now, we had a joke for a long time that we either did that really well or really poorly because they left and went across the country. Eventually, we chased them down. But as parents, that's our job. From the moment they are born, we are preparing them to leave. And when the time comes, we have to let go. You see, one of the things that parents do that keep their kids from hitting the target is to hold on. And the longer you try to control your kids, one of two things is going to happen. They're either going to fly to a target that you never desired, or they're never going to launch. You have to be willing to let go. And when you prepare them, and when you aim them, and when you release them, then your children will fly towards the target. You look at this psalm. I want you to notice all of the different ways this psalm says children are awesome. Okay? Let's go back to it, verse 3 again. Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord. That's a good thing. The fruit of the womb, a reward. That's a good thing. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed, that's a good thing, is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate. This is simply to say, look, parents who release their kids and whose kids hit the target never have any regrets. They're not put to shame. Let me pause just for a second. Because I know there's two groups of people who are here this morning, and it may feel like this part of the sermon doesn't feel super relevant to you. And maybe that's because you've never had kids. And I know for some people this is painful. And it's hard to hear me up here talking about children are a blessing and a heritage and how great this is. And you're thinking, I always wanted kids. I don't have kids. And this is one of the great pains in my life. And I wish I could stand here and say to you, well, this is why. But I can't do that. I know that God is sovereign. I know that he's in control. But I don't understand everything that he does. What I do know is that he still has something for you. And whether you have been blessed to have children or you've been blessed not to have children, God has something for you. And I know that for some of you, to hear me talk about how to aim your kids and how to prepare your kids and how to launch and release your kids, this is extraordinarily painful because you feel like your kids have missed the target. And there's regret, maybe there's guilt, maybe there's shame, maybe there's questions. Why do my kids not love the Lord? And what I want to say to you is that it's never too late to start. You may look back and say, man, I wish I had thought about aiming my kids 30 years ago. It's never too late to start. Now, I can't tell you what the outcome will be. You can only control what you can do. And maybe now what that means for you is that you're going to try to prepare and aim and launch your grandkids. Or maybe you're going to reinvest in your own kids in a new way, try to bring that relationship to a new place. But I also think there's something in this for us all as a church. Because whether you have kids that are young or kids that are old or you don't have kids or you haven't had kids, wherever you may be, we as a church are also called to raise our kids. And several years ago, a group of pastors in this area decided every summer they were going to teach through the Psalms together. I don't know when they started this, but it was about 126 Psalms ago. And each week they would do several Psalms. And each summer they would do somewhere around 10 Psalms, so this has obviously been going on for maybe almost a decade. I didn't know they were doing that. Most of you probably didn't know they were doing that. Until this January, I sat down with a local pastor and we were talking. He said, hey, we're doing this thing this summer. We would love to have you guys join us. We're teaching through the Psalms. I said, that sounds cool. Let's do it. Now, when they started teaching through the Psalms, and when I agreed to do it this summer, none of us had any idea that this would be the Sunday that we would be on Psalm 127. And yet here we are, and I don't think God makes mistakes. I think God's in control of everything, and I think way back, years and years ago, when they started doing this, God was like, you're going to start the calculations here so that on this day at Lake Bible, they are going to be in Psalm 127, because on this day, after the service, they're going to be having this big meeting, and David's going to have to give a State of the Church address, and I really want him to talk about kids, and a great way to intro that is to have them look at Psalm 127 together. So I want us to look at Psalm 127 together from the perspective of all these kids are all our kids. In fact, in my early notes, getting ready for this sermon several weeks ago, I wrote in big block letters, actually I have it in here, because I don't usually have all of my study notes with me, but I do today. This is kind of cool. Look at this right here. You can see it, right? We're at big block letters and highlighted, and it says, what if this psalm was a rebuke to a church? Not just to Lake, but to any church that has been so busy focusing on itself that it's forgotten about the next generation. Because see, there's three temptations that every church faces. And I've been around the block. I'm a pastor's kid. I've been in a lot of churches. I know how this works. There's three temptations that every church faces. The first is to say, look what we have built, just like this psalm begins. Look at our building. I mean, this is such a thing among pastors. Well, yeah, we're going into a new building project. We're going to be adding 500,000 square feet. It's going to be about $35 billion. It's going to be amazing. Pastors love to talk about their buildings, and sometimes this can become a source of pride for a church. Look at our building. Look what we have built. There's a second temptation that churches face, and it's the temptation to insulate ourselves from the world, to protect ourselves from the world, to try to put up big walls to say, you know what, the world is awful, and we are the holy people, so let's keep them out. Let's not let them in because they're just going to mess up what we've got going on here. And when churches insulate themselves from the world, what they've done is they said, we're going to keep ourselves safe. But guess what? The Lord's not in that. And the watchman on the wall trying to protect the city, if the Lord isn't in it, he cannot keep the city safe. The third temptation is the temptation to be busy. Look at what we're doing. We're doing so much. This has existed since the beginning of the church. In fact, in Revelation, when Jesus is talking to his churches, he talks to the church of Ephesus. And he's like, you guys started really well, but you got really busy and you forgot your first love. And that's a temptation for the church. And here's the thing that happens is sometimes when churches fall into these temptations of look what we have built, let's keep ourselves safe, look at how much we're doing. What they're doing is they're actually building for the here and now, and they forget about the there and then. They take their eyes off the future, and they take their eyes off the future generation. And Jesus had really strong words about this. Jesus said in Mark chapter 9, he said, whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him if a great millstone were hung around his neck and he were thrown into the sea. Jesus says, I care about the kids. I care about the faith being passed to the kids. And if you're keeping the kids from knowing me, it would be better for you to just go and drown and be out of the picture because you are a detriment to the kingdom. And I hear words like that and I say, I don't ever want to be that. I don't want to be that dad. I don't want to be that pastor. I don't want to be that church. So I begin to think, what does it look like for us to be a church that values children, that values the next generation? Because you see, we live in a world that doesn't, right? Our world has lost the value of kids. In fact, we live in a world where kids are devalued. The birth rates in our country and in most of the Western world are plummeting because people are having fewer and fewer kids, and they're waiting longer and longer to have kids because kids are an inconvenience. In our country, abortion has moved from being legal to being acceptable to being celebrated. And what that means is that we as a nation are really not any different than the pagans who would sacrifice their kids hoping that means they would have a better life. Because that's what we do. We sacrifice our kids hoping that means we'll have a better life. So what does it look like for us as a church to be countercultural? To say we value kids. We see kids as a blessing from God. I think it looks like this. I think Lake Bible Church becomes a place where children are prepared, aimed, and released. Where we're investing our energy, where we're investing our resources, where we're investing our time to prepare our kids and aim our kids so that we can release our kids. How do we do that? Well, one of the things we do is we make sure that every child grows up to know Jesus, to love Jesus, and to follow Jesus with their whole lives. That's our goal, that every child who comes through those doors knows who Jesus is. Every child who comes through those doors knows that Jesus loves them and that they can love him and that they can follow him. And as they grow from children into teenagers, we begin to prepare them so that every student is ready to leave our church without leaving the faith. Because they are going to leave our church. They're going to grow up, they're going to move away, they're going to find other places, and that's fine, and that's great. But when they leave our church, we don't want them to leave our faith, and that means we have to invest. So how can you do that? Let me finish with just 3 really practical steps that you can do to be a part of this. Number 1, you can pray. Pray for the kids in our church. Pray for the parents in our church. Pray for the people who are working with our kids on Sundays and on Wednesdays and throughout the week. Pray that we will be a church that is raising kids up so that they will grow the kingdom. Number 2, You can volunteer. You can help. You know, you don't have to be a great teacher to work in kids ministry. You can just be someone who's like, I can show kids that I love them. Right? I can be present. I can be helpful. So sign up to volunteer. You know, write on your connection card, I'd like to help with kids. We'll find a place for you. I'd like to help with VBS. We'll find a place for you. And the third thing is you can invest. Sometimes that means making sacrifices. Say, I'm going to invest my time. I'm going to invest my resources. I'm going to invest my energy. Just, ask the question, hey, where can I help? What can I invest in the mission of Lake Bible so that we can be a church that's ensuring that our kids are prepared, aimed, and released? You can build your life. You can protect your life. You can keep your life safe. You can work hard for prosperity in your life. But as long as you're focused on building what you want to build, you'll never build what God called you to build. In the late 1800s, there was a man named C.T. Studd. And he had everything. He was born into a wealthy family, had the best education. He lived in England. He was a great athlete. In fact, he played cricket. And he was so good at cricket that he eventually played on the national team. He was famous in England. There were songs about him. He had everything. But he decided that the one thing he wanted was to follow Jesus. And that for him meant becoming a missionary. And so he left everything behind. He left his fame behind. He left his athletic career behind. He left his education behind. He even left his money behind. When he received his inheritance, he gave it all away. A big chunk of it even he sent over here to America to help with the starting of Moody Bible Institute in Chicago. But C.T. Studd, with nothing, went to China, and he served there as a missionary for many years. And after he was there in China, he went to India for a period of time and started organizations there and worked as a pastor there. And eventually he made it all the way to Africa, where he lived in the Congo for many years and died in the Congo. Alone, penniless. But one of the poems that C.T. Studd wrote as he went through his life, he liked to write, and one of the poems that he wrote, there was a line that was repeated throughout the poem. In every verse of the poem, he repeated this line at the end of it. It was very simply this: only one life 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. Let's build for him. Let's pray. Father, thank you that we have confidence that when you are in it, everything will succeed. Thank you that we have confidence that when you are in it, you will protect us. You will keep us. Father, I pray that this morning as we think about this powerful psalm, that you will help each of us to evaluate our own heart, to look deep inside, to listen to your Spirit, to see what parts of our lives we've been building on our own. That we'll turn those over to you. Father, help us to be a church that is building your kingdom. Help us to be a church that is reaching the next generation for you. In your name, amen.